Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Palisade Capital Management's first ever live virtual event. I'm Lorraine Salvo, Head of Financial Planning at the firm, and I'd like to offer you a very warm welcome as we look to spend the next hour together with our dynamic and fun speaker, Catherine Childers. Our President and CEO, Alison Berman, will be moderating the program this evening and will be joining us in just a bit as we go through a brief video first to get to know our speaker. Then Catherine will talk about her experiences and provide lots of fun anecdotal stories to entertain us and inspire us. And then there will be a Q&A session at the end where at any time you can pose questions via the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado, let's get to know our speaker, Catherine Childers, with a brief video.
Some 50 years ago, Catherine Childers made history as one of the first female special agents selected to carry the badge of the United States Secret Service, one of 5 young women who shot holes in the glass ceiling of federal law enforcement, the first women in the history of the Secret Service to do so. Her job was to keep some of the world's most important people alive. She took an oath to protect and serve the President of the United States at all cost. Her office, the White House, the Greek island of Scorpios, Hyannisport, and the bad streets in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles, where she worked undercover investigations. She also investigated threats against the president. Her life reads like a script for an action movie, one that would scare most women to death. The story she will share with you today is real. Making history was a personal best for Catherine. Opening doors in an arena of first opportunities for women is her legacy. As a little girl, her father taught her how to face fear with a dead-eye aim, and she's been doing it ever since. Today, she will share his simple advice that changed her life and might change yours. Please welcome Catherine Childers.
Hi there. How are you all? Nice to see you. There's Alison. Wow, you're a busy girl.
Oh, my apologies to you and to everyone on the call. Business has to always come first. We had a nice new business pitch that was just wrapping up and ran a little bit over, so I apologize to everybody.
No apologies. Your job is to go make people money. Alison, make us some money. Isn't that you say you're what is your tagline about being fundamentally different? Anyway, how are you?
Hanging in there. Nothing like getting the heart pumping, jumping from one thing right into the next. But we are very excited to have you here with us to talk a little bit, get to know you, hear some of your compelling stories.
Well, I'm ready if you are. So should we get started? Then I hope there's some good questions at the end and you and I can have some fun going back and forth with that.
Yep.
So here we go. Okay.
Absolutely. I hand it off to you, Catherine.
All righty. This is where I grew up, in the mountains of Utah and Colorado. You wouldn't think I'd be talking to a bunch of women, not a bunch, but an esteemed group of women on the East Coast, having grown up in the mountains of Utah and Colorado. The remarkable thing is that my life changed as a little girl when I wanted to grow up and be Annie Oakley. She was a sharpshooter, as you may know, or some of your listeners may know. Wasn't afraid of anything. She traveled with the Buffalo Bill Wild West show and was the only role model and uppity, I was even uppity then, 8-year-old back in the 50s, really had to look up to. I had a horse. I had a dog. I even had little buckaroo boots and a fringed cowgirl coat, but I didn't know how to shoot my dad's old .22. I asked him to teach me many times. I was relentless. Does that surprise you? The crazy part about this is he finally gave in, and this or one very much like this, changed my life. He said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do this. And he said, we walked back to the back 40 of this little property we lived in. And you know what? I'm going to have to tell my technical guy, we need to make my copy bigger. I'm not 40 anymore and I can't see it. So they're going to adjust that just a little bit. As we all know that happens, can't do it. Okay, I'm just supposed to talk. I'm going to tell you the story about how this can, not exactly this can, really did change my life. He said, okay, today we're going to teach you how to shoot the can off the post. I said, today's the day? He said, yep, I think we will. So we walked down to the back 40. We came along to a post that he thought was appropriate, and he put the can on the post and lifted his old 22, snugged it into my shoulder. He said, okay, breathe, breathe in, breathe out, take aim, squeeze. And at that point, tears ran down my cheeks. He said, what's wrong? Looking bad or taking back the gun, I said, I don't know. He said, it's okay. It's okay. You're probably too young anyway. You're just a girl. Well, he wouldn't dare say that to me now. But anyway, he said, most girls simply don't shoot. No, I said, I'm just scared. So what do you want to do? He asked. Our daddies will do that. I'll bet you've had that experience as well. He said, what do you want to do? I said, well, it's simple. I want to do it, but I'm just scared. He looked at me with his kind eyes, as daddies do. And Allison, I know you probably experienced that. And he said, well, then just do it scared. I realized at that point in my little life that unless I moved forward, unless I got those little buckaroo cowgirl boots out of the mud, I'd be stuck. And I still wanted to be Annie Oakley. Turns out I squeezed the trigger and bang, I was hooked on doing something little girls on those days didn't hardly try. Little did I know that that single piece of advice would come into play the rest of my life. We left Utah when I was in the 5th grade and moved to Pueblo, Colorado, leaving dreams of my riding in the Wild West show in the dust. But it turns out that day that my father taught me how to shoot that can off the post came in handy in more ways than you'd ever think. I discovered that I was athletic, excellent at sports that I tried, like tennis and skiing. And back in the 60s, that was unusual. We were called tom girls, or tomboys rather. Now you're called an Olympic hopeful. But there were no sports for women. You may not even know that, but there weren't, except at Centennial High School, where I was asked to join the girls' rifle team. And I loved to compete. Qualified as an NRA Distinguished Expert ranking, one of the first women to really distinguish herself at the state level, became one of the best shots in the state, even against the boys. I was voted this was my senior high school picture in the annual. I was voted the most athletic of my senior class. I still would have been much preferred to have been a cheerleader or most popular. But oh well, I got to do a lot of good stuff. I went to the University of Colorado and got a degree in education. In the late 60s, even with a college degree, you became a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. My mother just hoped for an MRS degree. I didn't get one. And when I talk to college girls these days about an MRS degree, they kind of think it's a Master's of Related Science. Not so much, but maybe true. Typing was the kiss of death. If you admitted it, you're pointed. Remember those pointy toes, those really pointy toe high-heel shoes? We knew that we'd be nailed to the floor in those shoes somewhere under a desk, maybe forever. But I wanted to be part of something important. I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. I was lucky. The Dean of Women at CU made a call that changed my life. The congressman she called on my behalf hired me. Yes, I admitted I could type. Several months later, I was eating lunch with a friend, and she had said she had heard they were hiring female bodyguards for the President of the United States and the First Family. She said you needed to know how to shoot a gun. She said she'd be scared to do that. I thought a minute and I said, I can, and I wouldn't be scared. She said, that would scare me to death. Wouldn't scare me. I gave that up when I was little. Where do you apply for a job like that? So I found out that you apply at the headquarters of the United States Secret Service and was interviewed by a man I thought I recognized. It was Special Agent Clint Hill. Remember this picture? He was the man who leapt on the back of the limo that fateful day in Dallas, the day President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I remembered watching it when I was in high school. During the assassination attempt, Agent Hill ran from the car from behind where he was riding from behind the president limousine and leapt onto the back of it and shielded Jacqueline Kennedy, our First Lady, and the stricken president with his body as the car raced to Parkland Memorial Hospital. I had never seen such an heroic act. We wondered who he was, why he was brave enough to do that, and it turned out it was because he was in the Secret Service. On November 22nd, 12:30 in 1963, any of us, and many of you I think who are listening today, will remember where they were and what they were doing. It changed our lives. And here I was at 22 in Agent Hill's office discussing the possibility that they might hire me to be one of the first female agents for the Secret Service. Well, I was hired in 1970. I joined 7 other young women from across the United States. We spent our first year in training and essentially on the job, assigned to whatever they could determine we might be good at as the first female agents. The training was really pretty tough. We learned jujitsu, arrest techniques, hand-to-hand combat, learned more firearm training than I ever thought possible, even though I was already a good shot. Driving skills. I even learned to drive the follow-up car behind the presidential limousine, and no girl had ever done that. Some of it was actually fun. Some was bone-chilling. I'm going to share a quick story with you about the training that we did for what they call a night stop. It was absolutely the most, I think, frightening thing that any law enforcement person does. And that's when they pull over a car in the dark of night, having no idea who's in the car or what the perpetrator of a crime or just anyone is doing. They loaded me and another rookie agent in a follow-up car and sent agents in another car through the Beltsville, Maryland Training Academy in the dark of night and said, catch them and pull them over. Of course, it was a training exhibit, a training thing. But at the same time, we were doing what we were supposed to do. We pulled up next to the car screaming, Secret Service, pull over, you're under arrest. Well, the car slowed just a little bit, then took off, then took off. And meanwhile, the other agent and I are trying to keep behind it, not knowing what we should do. Shortly thereafter, the car stopped. 2 people got out of the car, threw their weapons out on the side of the road, and stood there with their hands up in the air. He yelled at me and he said, did you count them? Did you count them? Did you see how many there were? I said, no, I couldn't see anything. And we were crouched down behind the big old door of this car we were traveling in. All of a sudden, it became very quiet. And I felt the cold steel of a revolver behind my right ear and the words, even colder, bang, you're dead. What had happened was one of the agents had jumped out of the car as they slowed down and literally got the drop on us and proved a very important lesson that you have to be seriously ready to think out of the box and question everything. If it doesn't look right, most likely it isn't. Well, in 1971, 5 of us were sworn in as the first female special agents in the United States Secret Service. It was quite a day. Actually, some people took it more seriously than others. One assistant special agent said, this is a grand historic occasion. And I thought, well, that's nice of him to say. Just like the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the San Francisco earthquake, and the Chicago fire. But we were trained and ready. But I thought, I'm really concerned that maybe the world wasn't quite ready for us. Turns out maybe they weren't. In fact, I'm going to read something for you from the Washington paper that carried Dateline Washington the day we were sworn in. And it says, in 1971, the date of 71, 5 young women took the oath of office today as special agents of the Secret Service and became the first of their sex to join the 106-year-old agency. Now listen to this. Customarily, they would be referred to as pretty or at least attractive, since this is true of most young women successful in their careers. Can you believe they said that? It gets worse. 3 were brunette, 1 a golden blonde, and the 5th had short, frosted dark hair. All had lithe, well-shaped figures. Their salaries ranged from $7,000 to $9,000 per year. And I realized I didn't know what lithe meant. I had to look it up, and after I did, it was quite flattering. But on the other hand, they'd never mentioned on the training we'd had, the fact that we had a top secret security clearance, the fact that we had the same job as the men. The reporter was far more intrigued with our hair color. Interesting to know, little did he know how easily we could have broken his pencil or taken him down with our thumbs if need be. We were tough gals. Well, they issued each of us a .357 Magnum revolver, handcuffs, a commission book, and a badge. I thought to myself, I'm going to need a bigger purse. But the best thing they gave me, the very best thing they gave me was a credit card, my very own American Express card in my name. In those days, women didn't get credit. Look at this. I still carry an American Express card, and I'm ready to doing an ad for American Express, if you know them. I think I was probably the first one to ever get one. Actually, now I have one of those platinum ones because I have my money with Palisade Capital Management. Not true, but I think that probably would be true. Anyway, I got the credit card, and the thing that you all just would never believe is that in those days, women couldn't get a credit card to buy gas, let alone a loan to buy a car or a house, unless their fathers or husbands or some guy down the street co-signed the application. So anyway, I had all my gear. I was ready to go. I was trained, and the world knew about us. So I put on my uniform and went to work. Went to work protecting, of all the people in the world, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, and his family. Protected them during parades and during demonstrations. I protected foreign heads of state, including Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir. Also, the Princess of Spain, who would become the Queen of Spain. I really liked her. It was fascinating as a 22-year-old woman to not only be in close proximity to Golda Meir, but a young princess who would be the Queen of Spain. They gave me this job kind of at the last minute to protect her and said, we've decided to let you work the state dinner after I'd been standing post at the back of the White House for the state arrival. The state dinner tonight, I said, and the head of the detail said, yes, do you have anything to wear? Well, girls, we know how it is. You have to know what you're going to wear to the state dinner. Well, I didn't, except I did have a pledge formal hanging in a cleaner bag at home that I brought with me from the University of Colorado. The problem was I didn't have a purse. You couldn't take that big old heavy purse to a state dinner. So I had to jump in my 1959 Volkswagen and head off to Garfinkel's to see if I could find a purse to take to the state dinner to carry all my gadgets, I call them, all my gear in. Well, I ran into Garfinkel's. It was a wonderful store. I'm in my pledge formal. I pick up my badge out of my purse and say to this nice woman who is now in total panic mode, I need to find a purse for my gun. Well, with that, she almost fainted. And then a red, white, and blue haze passed across her eye, and she said, come with me. We went to a changing room, and she held the curtains close while I tried every single black Potoswab bag they had to see where my .357 Magnum would be comfortable. I usually tell that to stories to mostly women's groups, but I think the men find that would be kind of a difficult thing to figure out as well. I traveled with them all over the country. The Spanish Royals were probably one of the most interesting groups to follow. And the most interesting experience was the fact that on board Air Force One, we touched down at Cape Canaveral, and the Royals were witness to the Apollo 14 launch. It was an incredible experience to be, as you see in this picture, sitting at the launch. I am right behind the princess has rather, I think in those days we called it a bouffant hairdo. Right in front of her is a woman with white hair. And then to stage right, if we were looking at the pictures, Neil Armstrong, the astronaut who walked on the moon. You can imagine my thrill of being in company like that. And then the vice president is on the left. For your information and just interest, this is both a combination of foreign dignitary detail and the vice presidential detail. And there are literally people all the way around, except in the back seat, but in the back row that are State Department. Those are all security. The White House was my office. I was assigned to protect not only foreign dignitaries, but the children of the late President John F. Kennedy, John and Caroline. After Mrs. Kennedy remarried under Aristotle Onassis for 2 summers, my office, and this was really tough duty, was the small village across the harbor from the island of Scorpios, where the yacht Christina was moored. I lived in a bare-bone room with a single light bulb hanging down from the ceiling, and took my post at a small cantina near the pier and waited. Mrs. Onassis would send a small boat, a whaler of some kind, to pick me up for a meeting on board the Christina. You see it behind Mrs. Onassis and the children here. It was quite the experience. The whole thing was a remarkable experience. The first time I met her on the aft of the boat, trying to be nautical here, we sat on a beautifully tiled floor with a grand piano ablaze with fresh flowers. How you get fresh flowers on the island of Scorpios, I do not know, but there was also a Picasso hanging on the wall. Another time I met with her, it was strange because we couldn't meet at that location because it had been converted. The tile floor had been converted and dropped into the bottom of the boat and was now a freshwater swimming pool. Needless to say, it was quite a remarkable boat. On that day, we discussed Caroline's plans to go to a tennis and skiing camp in Austria, where I would become an undercover counselor. Remember those skills I talked to you about? I hope I have earlier on. But the bottom line was the reason I got the job, the reason I was assigned to some of the most unusual undercover counterfeit jobs and also protecting the Kennedy children, was I had all these kind of interesting background, interesting skills, tennis, skiing, travel. I'd been a teacher. All of these things came to play. And for instance, on this case, she was going to this Austrian tennis and skiing camp. Well, the paparazzi were driving her crazy. And I would, as you can see on the left, I was her undercover tennis coach. Nobody really knew who I was. But a story kind of like on a paper similar to the Globe broke and was on one of the little newspaper stands in the small village where it said, mit Tennisschlager und Karate-Dame, and went on to say how Caroline was always followed by a woman who could, again, take down people with her thumbs. I think that's where I got that quote. That summer, they also visited Hyannisport. People asked me what the Kennedy compound was like. Well, it was large, but actually quite simple. This was the president's father's house, Ambassador Kennedy's home. It was the large home that we saw frequently in the 60s and 70s as the headquarters for the Kennedy political campaign. The rest of the family had simpler Cape Cod type beach cottage that's I'm sure you all are far more familiar with than I. But on my first meeting with young John and his governess, Marta, I noticed something unusual about the president's house. The backyard, anyway, had a small trainer in the backyard, a gift from the Navy to young John. On one of those details on Hyannisport, I thought the children would be joining their mother in the opening of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington. This time I was ready. I even had a dress and an appropriate purse. But at the last minute, she was decided, for some or whatever reason, not to take the children along. And as typically with kids, they were disappointed and were whining about having nothing to do. You know, part of my job, as I was told, was to protect and serve the president and the people and the individuals and the international people that the Secret Service told me to protect. But tongue in cheek, I was always also told, particularly with the children, that it was my job to keep them safe, keep them happy, sometimes keep them entertained, and of course, at all costs, keep them from embarrassing the President of the United States or their mother, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Well, here I had to think out of the box again. What was I going to do with them? And I suggested a drive-in movie. I'm a Colorado girl. I grew up on drive-in movies. I really don't believe they'd ever been to one, but Kelly's Heroes was playing in Hyannisport. And we decided that that would be a great alternative to the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Organized a popcorn popping project in preparation for the show. You didn't think I could do that. My assistant here didn't think I could say all those P's. Anyway, young John burned the butter. We gathered up the cousins, including Maria Shriver, and packed pillows and blankets and packed them in. It was quite the event. And the bottom line was we had to realize that they were just kids. They were in the big, it wasn't a limousine, but it was a standard sedan. And all of a sudden they said, "We want to sneak in." I said, "Sneak in? What? Yes, we hear kids sneak in. So as we pulled up to the ticket booth to get into the Kelly's Hero drive-in, I held up 7 fingers and said, 2 please, and paid for it out of my own $7,000 salary. But they had a great time that night. Then came undercover assignments that were really very frightening. I was assigned to a special anti-counterfeit task force and was instrumental in getting hundreds of thousands of bogus bills off the streets in New York. This is an example of the kind of things that we did. I was always undercover, whether I was protecting the Kennedy children or working with an undercover agent buying counterfeit. No one suspected a woman simply because there were no women in law enforcement. I think Angie Dickinson may have been the only even famous celebrity who played police women. Let me tell you about how I got the job. And I would just say that it's your education that's your ticket. All of you listening today know that. But it's what you bring along in your backpack of skills that sells your sizzle. Expertise, hobbies, the things you do that are heartfelt or you feel passionate about. I call them gadgets. I said that before. They're usually not on your resume, maybe not on your financial statement, but they're the things that catch people's attention, sell your sizzle, and more often than not, get you a job or get a job done that you want to get done. Why was I selected first female agent in the Secret Service? I didn't know. I didn't have a degree in bodyguarding and law enforcement. I had the degree in elementary education, but that very heavy backpack gave me a lot of help. In talking with Director Hill recently after writing my foreword, he offered to write the foreword to my book. And I asked him why he hired me. He said, strangely enough, not only do agents have to be prepared to give the ultimate sacrifice and die to protect whoever they're protecting, but they need to be able to feel comfortable and to be dropped into the environment of what the people are doing that you're protecting and not be noticed. And he seemed to think that I might be able to do that, particularly with Caroline. Some of the agents called me the pistol packing nanny. I was always undercover, and the jokes honestly didn't bother me. It was a great assignment. Some of the male agents they had their doubts about working with women. They had a hard time taking us seriously. For me, the trick was to always keep a sense of humor. And I think that's so true in even today's world with the difficulties we all face with change. They weren't abusive, confused, probably, a little angry, very much so. But we worked it out, and I can assure you that having a sense of humor helped. One day, an agent that I really liked, and I thought he liked me, big enough to have played for the Giants and probably won the game, drew me as a partner for an arrest of a counterfeiting suspect in a dicey part of DC. He wasn't happy. As we approached, he said, "You're so tough. You break down the door." I said, "You're so tough. You break down the door and I'll shoot them. I'm a lot better shot than you are." Well, sensibility reigned and we knocked and they opened the door and we became good friends. When a team of Secret Service men and women work together for a common purpose to protect and serve and keep the president alive, it's called the Presidential Detail. I was lucky enough to work for Jerry Parr, who ran the Foreign Dignitary Detail when I protected the Princess of Spain and Golda Meir. His best piece of advice about anything was to plan for the worst and pray for the best. Not particularly bad suggestion in these times. It was Agent Parr who covered President Reagan and pushed him into the limousine during the assassination attempt by John Hinckley. I was honored to have known him. His advice can serve us in all times and difficult times like we face now. Well, since there were only 5 women, we were rotated throughout the details. At one point, I was assigned to protect the Kennedy kids. When I was assigned to the detail in New York, Caroline attended the Brearley School, and her mother made it clear she wanted me to follow her to school in the car so that she could walk with her friends, giving her a sense of normalcy. Well, that made my job very difficult. On one particular day, she and her friends decided to walk the opposite direction down a one-way street. Go figure. I had to turn on the lights and siren in my big black car and circle the block round and round every time they went the wrong way in Midtown Manhattan in traffic. They thought it was funny. I didn't. I think they only did that once. On another occasion, Caroline hopped in the car after school announcing she had to tutor and was late and started barking directions. I said, "It's not on the schedule and I don't have backup." She said calmly, "I don't care." So heading down First Avenue, I called the command post and reported the change of plan. "Turn left," she said suddenly, and I checked the oncoming traffic and made the turn when we were T-boned. I ordered her to get on the floor and drew my revolver and jumped out of the car, scanning rooftops and the accident scene, trying to ascertain what had happened. We were trained that accidents were oftentimes used as a diversion, but the car in question didn't fit the scenario. It was a 65 beat up, badly bondoed caddy with big fins driven by a short, chubby man with a pork pie hat and a little stubby cigar in the side of his cheek. And the dribble was coming down his cheek while the hissing from the broken radiator made a certain uninteresting noise. Screaming, "Secret Service, don't move, you're under arrest," I rolled him up on the hood of the car. Well, he looked at me from the side of his hat and said, "I think there's a problem here, lady." He said, "You hit me." Well, I had hit him. It was a one-way street, as you New Yorkers will know. Amidst a gathering crowd and a cacophony of New Yorkers blaring their horns, I gingerly helped him up and assured him that the service would take care of any repairs on his car. Caroline had been peeking up over the back seat watching. When I got back in the car, she said, "Hey, you're pretty good." And I even got her to tutoring on time. As much as I loved my job, there was little love in my life. I was learning you can't have it all. It was becoming clear my career as a special agent was more than just a job. It would be my life. I do remember one date I had with a pompous fellow from the Hill. He was making fun of me for carrying a gun and a badge and handcuffs in my purse, commenting that he didn't believe a woman would have to know how to do with all that stuff. 3 seconds later, he was cuffed to his chair. I thought it was funny until I remembered that I didn't have the key. Needless to say, we didn't go out again. Remember that picture where I showed you I was protecting the future Queen of Spain, sitting next to Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon, all those fancy people? My mother saw it too. On Walter Cronkite's live broadcast, she wasn't impressed and called my sister in Corpus Christi, Texas, and said, "You're going to have to find her a husband. She's sitting in the middle of all those famous people with a gun in her purse. No man will ever marry her." Well, my sister Anna did a great job and introduced me to a charming psychiatrist, a fifth-generation Texan who wore Lucchese boots and who grew up in Abilene. It was love at first sight, I suppose you could say. Romantic, exciting, so much fun, and very inconvenient. We dated long distance for a year or so. Let's put it this way, it ruined my career. He proposed while I was on the range with 30 male agents qualifying with an Uzi submachine gun. The range officers shouted over the PA, "Cease fire, make your weapon safe. Agent Clark has a phone call from Texas." It was Cecil, and he said, Kate, I have the ring. Will you marry me?" I whispered, "Cecil, it's not really a good time." Well, my exciting career as one of the first 5 came to an end. I will admit it was a hard job to quit. But as you can see, I've spent most of my life talking about, and yes, I've written a book. I married Cecil and moved to Corpus Christi, reinvented my life as a wife and mother, and with 3 stepsons and our own son, Clark, and actually got my own TV show. When the news director asked me if I'd be scared to interview famous people on TV, I said, "Do I have to keep them alive?" He said, "No, just talk to them." That was the easy part. Cecil and I were married for 45 years. I so loved what I saw behind those piercing blue eyes, and yet I had to lower my expectations of our lives together when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We fought it together for 12 years. He wasn't scared as long as I was by his side. I was his bodyguard. I was scared to death. An Alzheimer's detail is not unlike some in the Secret Service. I did the best I could keep him safe, comfortable, and happy. But I failed at keeping him alive. There was no cure. He passed away on the 4th of July, 2018. My best piece of advice for you is be kind rather than right if you're in a situation like that, but that's a whole nother story. The last time I spoke with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was when I ran into her on Fifth Avenue in 1972. She asked me what I'd been doing, and I told her about all my crazy assignments. She was particularly interested because I'd left her children's detail. We talked for a few moments. "Oh, Agent Clark," she said, "you live such an interesting life," in that wonderful, breathy voice. I thought to myself for a moment, it's all relative, smiling as we said goodbye. I thought how amazing it was that this extraordinary woman suggested that I lived an interesting life. While protecting the children, I found her to be one of the most courageous women I had ever met, and a remarkable mother. Even on the world stage, she claimed it was the most important thing about her. My book, Scared Fearless, comes out this spring, celebrating 50 years since 5 young women took the oath to protect and serve the country as the first female agents. It has been an honor to have been one of the first, not necessarily the best, not the last. Now today, over 500 women serve. This is Clint Hill today, a New York Times best-selling author of 5 books, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, and most recently, 5 Presidents. He was kind enough to write the introduction to my book, and this is what he said. They were pioneers who blazed the trail for hundreds of female agents that followed. Catherine is an example of why I'm so proud of them and the tremendous value they added. Obviously, that touched my heart that he said that. A few years ago, I was asked to do a TED Talk on the topic Imagine. The speakers were chosen based on their answer. Mine was, imagine, if you do it scared, what your life could be. No one could have imagined our lives in the years 2020. It's turned out to be pretty good advice, actually. First, you have to figure out what it is. Then you have to be brave. Then you have to be determined. And you do all that just by doing it scared. Well, I never got to be Annie Oakley, but you'd see over here in my office, I did frame the coat. So I'll never forget that I had lofty goals, and I think she would be proud of me. Thank you so much. This has been great fun. And Allison, I hope those were some of the stories you hope to hear.
Absolutely. I mean, your story is so remarkable, and you truly have lived an interesting life, even by Jackie O's yardstick, which is quite long. What I would like to do is just address our audience. We have time to take some questions for Catherine. So there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you just tap that, please feel free to type in your questions. Because we have so many folks on the line, we're going to keep everyone muted, but we would love to ask Catherine some questions. And please, if there's anything to ask Catherine, assure me. Very few things are off limits.
Well, now, Allison, I understand you're a wannabe cowgirl too.
That's right. I'll have to go grab my picture in a moment. I had sent it over to you. Your Annie Oakley shot reminded me of a picture I had handy of myself and my father. And I know you and I had spoken and really about the prominent roles our fathers played in our lives. And I know for me and our family at Palisade, my father was the founder of Palisade and really brought me into the business, and in so many other ways taught me everything I know. One of our audience members has asked, was your father able to see you become a Secret Service agent, and what did he think?
Actually, he did. He was far more impressed with it than I think my mother was. My mother genuinely thought I'd never find a husband. And it was a big concern to her. And, in the book, I played that up quite a bit. But then I started realizing back in 1971, women were genuinely concerned that their daughters could not make a living, that they couldn't be successful. Daddies believed we could do anything. But I think mothers were thinking, boy, they need to have a husband if they're even going to get a credit card. You didn't hear me say this, but I don't know if you were on yet, but I told you about having my American Express card. I think if I had invested my money in Palisade Capital Management, I'd have a platinum. I'll have to talk to you about that.
We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Make sure you're set up well. Absolutely. One of our other audience members has 2 college-age daughters. One is graduating this year, and the other still has a couple more years left in school. What advice would you give them as they decide on their careers and entering the workforce?
Well, I think it goes along with the do it thing. If they're scared of things that the direction they're going, they have to decide what it is that they're scared of. I think that's a really important factor for all of us. In my case, I'm now 73 years old and a widow. So the things I'm afraid of now aren't as focused as when I was in college. And at that time, I was scared that I hadn't found a husband. I remember Alice in Wonderland, where she looks up at the Cheshire Cat and says, "Where do I go from here?" And he says, "It depends on where you're going." That really touched me as a young woman, knowing I don't have any idea where I'm going because the options are so few. So for young women now, I think you have to reach out because the world is your oyster. I just saw where a woman is now a new coach for, is it a football team, a baseball team? The opportunities for women have, and you as a CEO now are so almost endless, and as we've ever thought. Reach out, try for it, but collect those skills. In my case, and I said it probably too much, but the things that I never would have thought important, being an athlete, being a skier, being a tennis player, being those kinds of things, and collecting those skills and really working to be good at it, created opportunities to me in a competitive manner with people who had the basic skills. So take those things off the shelf and hone them and be good at it. That would be my advice. And now with the Secret Service, many of those women now have law degrees before they even start. The other thing is, if you're interested in that, you have to pass a top secret security clearance. I often say to young people, everything that you do either helps you or haunts you. So be cautious about the haunting part. And what?
Be careful on Facebook.
Yeah, and be careful on Facebook, as my tech fellow friend here says. Anyway, does that help?
No, I think absolutely. I think that's very important advice, and something to keep in mind, in 2020, which has been an incredible year, no matter how you measure it for us in our day jobs, looking at the market, tremendous market fluctuations. You have the COVID-19 pandemic. You have so many reasons to be fearful. And, FDR is famous for his quote, "There is nothing to fear except fear itself." When you were coming up through your career and you were literally had to put your life on the line, how did you channel those fears into advancements and those fears and take them from something that could hold you back to something that propelled you forward?
I can remember thinking, as I was surrounded by these men and women that were hired for their bottom line was you had to be worthy of trust and confidence. And someone asked me that once, and there were some friends that weren't in the Secret Service. They were normal people. But I said, if we were all standing on the side of a road and a toddler wandered out into the middle of the road, there isn't one of us here that wouldn't leap out there and do everything we could to save that child's life. I think it's a DNA thing. I think being willing to sacrifice, wanting to participate, wanting to be part of the solving the problem, I think it comes with the territory of who you are. My guess is that your father gave you some good advice. And my guess is that you wouldn't have any trouble grabbing that toddler. It's just in the short time I've met you. Did he give you some advice?
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was growing up, and I didn't realize this till, I was in college, and one of my friends called me a feminist. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I grew up with a mentality that I could do things and I didn't necessarily question them. And it didn't even occur to me, I didn't see women in certain roles. And I at that time, didn't see women running companies, or I didn't see, women in positions that I would want to aspire to. It didn't necessarily occur to me. I knew he instilled in me that if you're smart enough and you work hard enough, you can go anywhere and do anything. And I'm curious for you, as you were working up and joined the Secret Service, were you consciously aware, and was it front of mind for you that you were quite literally shooting bullets through the glass ceiling?
Not as much as you'd think, because there was so much change. I was just part of a sea of women all doing different things. There were women boots on the ground that were what we called hippies, liberals, women's libbers. There were all sorts of degrees of women doing things to say things need to change. We had only had the vote 50 years ago for 50 years. I mean, that's nothing. Can you imagine only having the vote for 50 years? And there were so many changes. There was Roe v. Wade. There was the distribution of birth control pills. There were things happening so rampantly. My job, I felt like, was to succeed in a man's world. There were other women who were battling the lack of opportunity. They were on the street. I was in a different format, but we weren't that far apart. But whether I thought I was blowing holes in the glass ceiling, I don't really think so. But looking back later, considering the fact that there were 5 of us, and I've talked to the other women, we are all still kicking, that we had to do it twice as well. If we were on the range, we had to shoot well. If we were making an arrest, we had to do it right. And then, as I said, we had to have a sense of humor. But now is the time that we're seeing incredible opportunity for women. I think back 50 years ago, we were battling for those opportunities. And I think oftentimes we should be standing on those shoulders and saying, thank you. Thank you to the women who weren't afraid to give it a shot. And I'm actually flattered to have been one of them. And I'm amazed at what you all are doing now. Look at you, you go girl. I'm so proud of you. And many of the people that are fighting this whole craziness in our country, raising their kids. In fact, I loved it when we were first setting up this interview. One of your people was in the car doing the phone call with her daughter, who was going, I believe, to a dental appointment, calling the CEO. We're all dealing with it the best we can. And I think a lot of that organization is falling to women. We used to think we could just have a baby and still have the job. Now you're at home running your own business, you're taking care of the kids. It's a huge challenge, but you'll be stronger for it. I've called the COVID thing an awe thing for me. I've done things that I never dreamed I would do. I was a speaker on a big stage, commanding quite the presence as a speaker, and just decided with my team, we wanted to be the best Zoom speakers possible, because I came from a TV background. I was on a little small screen in a small city, but had my own show for 18 years. And it was so much fun because you learned that there were people out there you could be friends with and never see. And really Zoom and all of this that we're doing virtually is expanding our opportunity to meet people from all cultures, from all places, and really to develop opportunities. I think we'll come out of it, and I think we'll say, maybe we learned something from it. I sure hope so.
No, absolutely. And I think as we go through this period and we're seeing more come out in the news, vaccines and whatnot, but we're working through what is going to lead to permanent change in the way we do business and the way we interact and the way we work on projects and work with others and meet others, and the way social change happens in our country. What is permanent and what will return to some of the ways we did things previously. I think it's a fascinating time that we're in right now. This outside event has accelerated change that we saw coming, but has really accelerated that change. It's incredible.
Let me share one story with you, unless you've got another question that I didn't get to. How are we doing time-wise? Are we okay?
We have a few more minutes if anyone wants to pop in questions to the Q&A section. We actually have 2 questions that I would love for you to address. They are, have you seen a change in the Secret Service today versus when you joined? And also, was there a time in your life that you felt you were in danger during your work, that your life was really being threatened?
Oh, tremendous change in the sense that we were like boots on the ground in Korea compared to the technical opportunities that people have now. Law enforcement has become so technical and so high tech is what I'm getting at. I kind of laugh about it. It's a little bit of an X-rated story, but in the 70s, for instance, any female products like Kotex were in brown paper sacks in the backside of the CVS or whatever. They were hidden. I mean, and men would never buy any for a wife or whatever. But those boxes were really verboten. And I was working undercover during one of the anti-war demonstrations where we had had threats against the president, and there were two of us down at the Washington Monument in the midst of some really violent demonstrations. And we had a walkie-talkie, just a walkie-talkie, that we were supposed to talk to the head of the detail that was in the White House, trying to determine how dangerous things were getting. And I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do with the walkie-talkie. Certainly these folks were not going to be happy to see me wandering around with a walkie-talkie. So I hid him in one of those big blue boxes in my backpack. And nobody ever knew. So I say that because it was such a simple time, and we were having to think out of the box and go one thing at a time. I think the most frightening things in the times that I felt most threatened weren't so much when I was protecting, because you didn't know. You know, you work a line of people at the presidential inauguration, and you're standing on post with a line of people screaming and yelling and cheering or whatever. You have no idea what's in their pocket. You have no idea what they're thinking. There's no way to clear or to pre-secure that place. So you're really at a danger zone of not knowing anything about what might happen in that kind of situation. But in working undercover in counterfeit, which was the second part of the job, they had us do both protection and counterfeiting. But on those situations, I was so oftentimes undercover with a male agent because no one would suspect that a woman who was playing the role of a girlfriend or whatever with him would be armed and would be in charge of really the protection of that other agent. And there were times during counterfeit buys where there was a lot of anger, and particularly when the arrest went down. At one point, I rolled underneath the car during an arrest, screaming at the agents that were arresting us as undercover agents to cover our cover, to not catch me because they were, they weren't nice people anyway. It would underneath the car with bad guys in the streets and whatever, those things were pretty scary. But in protection, not so much, because I never knew of a particular situation that had developed to the point where it was threatening.
Given where you are in your life, looking back, are there any regrets that you have that you wish you would have done things differently?
No, I don't think so. I think I would have been better at handling change. I didn't want things to change. It was like college was so much fun and so good, and you graduated and then you had to figure out another section. The change, I wasn't particularly good at change, and I wasn't particularly good at making the decision to marry Cecil. I would have liked to have been, that's pompous to say, but I would have liked to have been in the hierarchy of the Secret Service. I could see the importance of women. I could see the need. It wasn't necessarily to replace male agents, but we were a part of the team, and I loved the team idea. And I would have probably stayed longer with the Secret Service, except that I met Cecil. And that's one of those situations where it's never convenient. So those changes, moving here and then having to, go from New York and living in Europe, and then I lived in LA for quite a bit, to a little town of Corpus Christi on the Gulf Coast. But Corpus Christi treated me well. Sometimes a smaller town or a smaller opportunity like this gives you more, the old deal about a bigger fish in a small pond. I would have loved to have lived in New York longer. I would have loved to have spent more. I'm an East Coast. I love the East Coast, and I would have liked to spend more time there. It just so happened I fell in love with a Texan. So you have to adjust.
You've truly had a remarkable career, a remarkable life. Is there any final anecdotes you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I wanted to share you one of my favorite stories from the book. I call it Three Women, because to me, women are a remarkable creature. Women are remarkable creatures, and they all face such different challenges that scare all of them. And when I was assigned to protect the children when Mrs. Onassis took them to the island of Scorpios, I think I told you that I was literally on post in this little canteen on this tiny little island. And most of the time the children are with them. So I was waiting. I did a lot of waiting, a lot of thinking, a lot of just being available. And there was an older woman on the hill who was a widow. She was a little Greek woman who'd lost her husband. And if you've been to Greece, you notice that so many of the women are dressed in black. I think they remain widowed most of their life, if not the rest of their life, and they wear black. And she kind of adopted me. She was a little older than I am, and she knew I was lonely. And the strange part was one day I'd take the whaler out to the yacht and have a glass of tea with Mrs. Onassis, who I had admired my entire life from the time I was a high school girl, and knew that she was the youngest woman I believe to ever be the first lady. She was only in her 30s when she was first lady. Talk about an inspiration in a time where there were, well, certainly Eleanor Roosevelt, but I admired her. And here I was in her proximity to kind of know her. We weren't best of friends, but I knew her, and I could see the angst she had on wanting to keep her children safe. So in the mornings and some days I would meet with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. In the afternoons, I would go and have coffee with this little Greek woman who was living in an unfinished house because she didn't have the money to finish it. And I'd bring a nickel, and we'd flip nickels because I didn't speak Greek and she didn't speak English. And we'd laugh about who won the nickel test. And she would bring me a cup of coffee. And I would always say, oh, please, would you join me in a cup of coffee? But she would go back to her little kitchen that had a kind of a cloth cover on it. And she would bring this little cup of very strong black coffee. Greek coffee, you need a lot of sugar. Kind of like New York regular coffee, right? Anyway, so she would bring this cup out and she would share with me, and I would drink the coffee. And not much longer, a couple of months or something, I was back in Lepkus, and her daughter was visiting. And I asked her about her mother. I said, why won't your mother join me in a cup of coffee? And she said, Catherine, she only has one cup. And I thought and then she went on to say she had other cups, but only one she felt proud enough to share with me. So imagine the juxtaposition of these three women. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, probably the bravest, the most interesting woman in the world, a 22-year-old gal from Colorado who happened to fall into this position because she could shoot cans off a post, and a Greek woman who was doing her best to survive. And yet we were all in this tiny little juxtaposition. So I think what my message would be is learn from all walks of life, men and women, but your women friends and the people that you will meet in your life all bring something to the table. And if I've brought anything to the table, it's my message to you to just put your can on the post. Get out there and do it scared. So thank you for having me. I hope you'll come visit me in Texas sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime. Your story is truly remarkable and inspiring. I want to thank you for the service to our country and for really following your instincts and following your gut. It serves as a role model to myself and to many others. And we appreciate you spending time with us, sharing your stories. For those of you listening, we appreciate you joining us. We hope to roll out other events in the future and tell more stories that are not just focused on portfolio companies and yield curves. We think there's real value in storytelling and hearing stories like Catherine's, even if just to distract us from what's happening in the world, but there's so much more to it. So Catherine, thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story and your life with us. I look forward to speaking to you more. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
The information contained in this webcast reflects the views of Palisade Capital Management, LLC, as of the date of its original broadcast, and such views are subject to change without notice at any time. All information provided in this webcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice or recommendation to purchase or sell any specific security. While the information presented herein, including information obtained from third parties, is believed to be reliable, no warranty is made concerning the accuracy of such information. There can be no guarantee that any forecast discussed in this webcast will be realized. Consult your financial advisor before making any financial planning or investment decisions. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results.